نعم الوكيل نعم المولى ونعم النصير. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله أولي بلا أول كان قبله، والآخر بلا آخر يكون بعده، الذي قصرت عن رؤيته أبصار الناظرين وأجزت عن نعته أوهام الواصفين. والحمد لله على ما عرفنا من نفسي وألهمنا من شكري. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبو القاسم محمد. وعلى آله طيبين طاهرين المعصومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صلوات. First and foremost, I would like to send my condolences out to Imam Zaman, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, and my condolences out to you all as we remember, take lesson from this tragedy of Karbala that happened some 1370 odd years ago. Inshallah, can all of the brothers move forward, also the sisters too.
Please, brothers, don't come forward.
Salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Brothers, can you move forward also, please? Thank you very much. There was other Mu'min one, Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. The events of Karbala are something that we've gathered during this time, year in and year out. We remember the events, we remember our beloved Imam, we remember his friends and his companions and his family. Many of us have neglected to realize that the events of Karbala should be addressed from two different aspects, or from two directions, but simultaneously. And if you neglect one aspect, then you're doing injustice to the other aspect. And if you neglect the opposite aspect, you're doing injustice to that aspect. The two aspects that I'm referring to is the first aspect of Karbala is the emotional aspect. These are the types of things that are discussed to make you cry, to make you emotional, to make you have a hatred and animosity towards dhulm, towards oppression. Then there's the educational side, the lessons that the Imam was teaching us on this tragic day. And not only Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, but the events leading up to this night. And for many, many years, we have neglected the educational side and only focused on the emotional side. The emotional side is designed to make you cry. The educational side are those things that Imam was teaching us, those examples that the Imam was showing us, those ways of Islam that the Imam was demonstrating to us that will get us closer to Allah. So there's two aspects of Karbala. The emotional side that is meant to make you cry, and the educational side that is meant to make you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat if you understand thus far. Another way of explaining this for my young brothers and sisters is that there are the things that happen to the Imam. There are the ways that the Imam was treated. And this is the emotional side as we reflect upon how Imam was treated, how Imam was oppressed. Then there's the educational side in which how Imam dealt with his opponents, how Imam dealt with his enemies. But for many, many years, we have got sidetracked and only focused on one aspect, the emotional side. When we focus on the emotional side, we gather on this night, we shed tears until our eyes are dry, and we leave, and then nothing else happens until next year. When we focus on the emotional side and the educational side, we leave on this night, our eyes are dry from so much tears, but also we have learned something, we have put something into our hearts, we have left here with something that will make us get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do things pleasing to Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam. The Imam taught us many lessons. What lesson did he teach us about akhlaq? Yes, the events leading up to Ashura, the events leading up to the desert of Karbala. Along the way, the Imam was teaching us akhlaq. Maybe you've forgotten that he was stopped by a battalion of Yazid's army, by Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyad. And although Imam knew that in a few days he would be without water because he's the Hujjat of Allah, and he knew this, he still not only watered the enemy, he also watered their horses. He displayed the highest of makaramul akhlaq, ithar. What is ithar? There is when you give your surplus. This is sadaqah. There is when you give that which you love, and this is bir, righteousness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, never will you attain righteousness until you give of that which you love. But ithar is when you give that which you yourself need. The Imam gave to his enemy the very water that he himself would need in a few hours. Also, from an akhlaqi standpoint, he taught us the example of sabr, how to be steadfast in the face of adversity. He also taught us being pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decrees. He also taught us, salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. He also taught us about the general aspect of sacrifice. And there are many other aspects of akhlaq that the Imam has exemplified, and his ashab and his family have exemplified in this tragedy. But it's unfortunate that all we've taken from it for many years is the fact that he was oppressed. And in many cases, we will condemn his opponents for oppressing him, and we ourselves will oppress our own selves. Disobeying Allah is oppressing ourselves. Not following Imam Hussein's example is oppressing ourselves. So one moment we'll curse our oppressors or his oppressors and then oppress our own selves because we haven't taken heed to the lessons. In simple words, for my young brothers and sisters, the desert of Karbala was a classroom. The desert of Karbala was a classroom in which Imam was teaching us about character. What many don't realize is that although politics may have caused all of the A'immah during their time to confront, once they confronted their opponent, it was all about character. The character of a Muslim versus the character of a non-Muslim. Imam Hussain demonstrated the character of a Muslim. He didn't just go and wage war. He went and still invited his enemies back to Haqq. He gave his opponents water. How many speeches did Imam Hussain give them trying to get them back on the right path? Think about these things. We've neglected one side of the events of Karbala and have oppressed it. This event is bigger than we have given it credit for. We thought it was big. It's bigger than you can imagine. Because Imam Hussain did not teach us an aspect of Islam. He did not teach us a specific topic of Islam. Imam Hussain and his ashab taught us the entirety of Islam. He taught us first and foremost a Shia, a true Shia, and when I say Shia, I don't mean the generic Shia. I mean the Shia to the highest level of the meaning the ones who the Ahlul Bayt themselves testify to the truthfulness of their claim. Not just us who claim we're Shia and that may or may not be true. We're talking about the Shia who the Ahlul Bayt testified to their claim. Those who died with Imam were his Shia. Whether they were his Shia for a few hours, because some of them became his Shia only a few hours ago before they were martyred, or they were Shia during the time of Rasulullah and continued being Shia all the way down from Imam to Imam to Imam to Imam Hussain. Nonetheless, they've kept to their promises. So one aspect, just to focus on one aspect of this tragedy of Karbala, Imam Hussain taught us how to travel Siratul Mustaqim. You know that thing that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for at least 10 times a day? Inshallah, 10 times a day. Ihdina Siratul Mustaqim. Imam Hussain showed us exactly what Siratul Mustaqim is. He demonstrated exactly what Siratul Mustaqim is. Many of us don't even understand what Ahlul Bayt is here for. We're not here to worship Ahlul Bayt. Ahlul Bayt are proofs. They are signs. What is a proof? What are they proving? The existence of Allah. What are they pointing to? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of us stop at them. We became their fan instead of their follower. And this Shabi Ashura, this Ashura should be different than any one that we've lived previously. Whether we're in our 60s, 50s, 80, or this is the third or fourth one, this should be different than the ones prior. What's the purpose of crying our heart out and disobeying Imam? Not realizing what he was really trying to show you. Crying is the minimum. Not the maximum, it's the minimum. Cry and do this. Cry and do that. Cry and do this. Cry and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Cry and follow my example. This is what gives this night its significance. This is what gives this night its meaning. You think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sacrificed his most beloved just so we can cry? Just so we can cry? Or does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not do anything in vain? There's always a wisdom behind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decrees. Salawat if this is correct. So how did Imam Hussain teach us how to travel Siratul Mustaqim? Most of us don't really know what Siratul Mustaqim is. Although Allah explains in Quran. He says, did I not take a covenant from you, O children of Adam, that you do not worship the shaitan? Verily, he's a manifest enemy to you. And that you worship me. Hada siratul mustaqim. This is the straight path. So what is the straight path? It's twofold. It's rejecting shaitan and obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam exemplified this. Although Muawiyah, lanatullahi alayhi, advised his son Yazid to leave Imam Hussain alone, he chose to not obey his father. He told him, leave him alone. I've already had his brother poisoned, leave him alone. Peace be upon both of them. But what? Yazid wasn't content with that. He wanted bayat from Imam Hussain as well as a few other famous personalities. This was not acceptable. Because to travel the straight path, Imam Hussain couldn't just say, I'm going to go over here and worship Allah and teach my true Shia. I'm just going to worship Allah. This is not the straight path. That's not acceptable. For Imam to say, no, I'm going to go over here and just worship Allah. He had to reject the shaitan. He had to reject Yazid. He had to oppose batil and falsehood. Imam Hussain exemplified La ilaha. There are no gods. We're not allowed to follow falsehood. We're not allowed to submit to corruption. And he had to oppose it. Because this is the first part of Sirat al-Mustaqim. Which is why he did not give his hand to Yazid. His establishing La ilaha was the fact that he did not give his hand to Yazid. His proving his obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his proving illallah, was that he gave his head for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He did not give his hand to Yazid, but he gave his head for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La ilaha illallah. He taught us that we must reject the shaitan in order to get to Allah. We must reject the shaitan in order to get to Ahlul Bayt. And he taught us that in the desert of Karbala. He couldn't just leave it alone. He had to reject shaitan. The whole purpose of Ahlul Bayt is to demonstrate for us what Allah says in Quran. And some other things, but in general, what we read in Quran that we may or may not understand, they demonstrate for us. They show us exactly how to do it. Some things, a lecture is not sufficient. You have to learn hands-on instruction. Imam exemplified La ilaha illallah. He let us realize that to be a true Shia, we cannot be the type who disobey Allah and also claim to disobey the shaitan, because there are three types of individuals. One of them say, I'm not going to obey Allah and I'm not going to obey shaitan. Sounds kind of weird, but yeah. They say, I'm not going to obey Allah and I'm not going to obey shaitan. An example of that is a son of one of the Khulafa, the second Khulafa, said that I am not going to help Imam Ali, but I will not help Muawiyah either. Which actually he's doing what? Helping shaitan. Because all it takes for good to win out is all it takes for evil to win out is for good people to do nothing. Which is basically what we do nowadays, nothing. We just talk a good game. Then there's the second type, who obey Allah and also obey the shaitan. We do all that is halal and we still do what is haram. We obey Allah by doing halal and we also obey the shaitan by doing haram. That's the second type, which is very common. Making the good deeds null and void. And then there's the third type, which the Imam showed us. He didn't just talk about it, he showed us. To be on Sirat al-Mustaqim, you have to disobey the shaitan and obey Allah. He manifested that in the deserts of Karbala. That's the only way. The only way we can get to Ahlul Bayt, the only way we can get to Imam Hussain is to reject the shaitan. This is the example that he gave in a few hours from now, 1300 years ago. How to travel the straight path the Imam taught us in Karbala. How to treat our enemies and our friends. Obviously, if he treated his opponents, obviously, before he got to the battle, and how he treated the battalion that stopped him and that escorted him to Karbala, just think, if he was rude to Hur, if he was rude to those men, those few, including Hur, wouldn't have came to his side. But his akhlaq, and he taught us how a Shiite is supposed to behave to their enemies, let alone to their brothers. He taught us how to treat our enemies in a good way, let alone the brother, because Allah says in Quran, you repel evil with that which is better. So he taught us in Karbala how to deal with our enemies. And some may say, oh, big deal. But listen, if he treated his enemy kind, then how did he treat his also brothers and sisters in faith? Many of us treat our enemies better than we do each other. And we seek refuge with Allah from this foolishness. This is what Imam taught us on the way to Karbala. He gave away, anyone who thinks he didn't know what was going to happen, then rejects that Imam Hussain was Hujjatullah, was the Wali of Allah. And the traditions about what's going to happen to him was passed down from Ali, from Rasulullah to Ali. When he was born, it was revealed what was going to happen to him. So it was no secret that that water that he was giving away was what his family was going to need. But have we learned this lesson? Look at how Imam treated his opponents. This is the lesson he's teaching us in Karbala. He treated his enemies good until they insisted on rebellion. But he treated them good with the intention of bringing them to Haqq, and many of them did. We only talk about Hur. Many of them came over. Not a large number, but more than you can imagine. More than Hur came over to Imam's side. Because of what? His akhlaq. He taught us this. In the face of adversity, he taught us to be sabr, to have sabr. Even the women showed more bravery than most of us do. Think about it. Imam taught us in Karbala how to travel the Sirat al-Mustaqim. He taught us akhlaq issues, how to be pleased with the decree of Allah. None of the ladies were crying because of the deaths of the individuals. They were crying because they were not going to see them again. They were crying because they were going to miss them. But they weren't crying because they didn't want it to happen. The proof is many of the wives who didn't have children were crying because they had no one to represent them in the battlefield. Look at the courage of these ladies. So Imam and his companions were also teaching us what? To be brave. That there is a coward and a Shia is an oxymoron. They're opposites. It's impossible to be a true Shia and a coward. We stand up against falsehood and oppression. This is what Imam was teaching us. This is what 14, 12, and 11-year-old youths were teaching us in Karbala. The worst thing that can happen to us in our time is someone says a bad thing. You kafir. As a matter of fact, I had a phone call today where there's a Shia brother who needs help, so he's in a Sunni center, and they were threatening him. And what did I say? Remember Imam Hussain. Still deal with him in a kind manner. Because Imam taught us to even be good to our opponents, because he's the walking Quran. Allah says, repel evil with that which is better. Perhaps you will make he who was your worst enemy your best friend, or something to that extent. Please come forward, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. So look at these lessons. Look at these lessons. Imam taught us about Sirat al-Mustaqim, how to travel it. It is not good just to obey Allah. You must reject the shaitan. And the main battle that we have to fight is our own self. That is the main battle. We don't have to stand against a 10,000-man army today. We just have to stand against shaitan. And this battle is not something, we think about the battle that took place in the morning, before noon. We think about that battle and neglect the battle that we take every single day. Shaitan is at us every single day. Shaitan is waging war against us every single day. You must fight him every single day. He is relentless. And Imam and his companions, young, old, male and female, showed us how we deal with shaitan. We do not stop until we are dead. Has this been learned? Remember, there's two sides of Karbala, the emotional side and the educational side. That which they did to the Imam and how the Imam dealt with them. What is to make us cry and what is to get us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we've neglected the part about getting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan is content if we just cry and don't do nothing. Imam Hussain cried and still waged battle. After every soul life was taken, he cried. And the next person and all the companions that were alive cried. Did they just cry and stand there, or did they cry and take their sword and take their turn in battle? Karbala. What have we really learned from Karbala? Do you think Imam Hussain died and sacrificed himself just to cry and write a poem? I mentioned last night that we have a battle against shaitan that is never ending. which is one reason why Karbala teaches how to fight the shaitan. Whether it's a shayatul in, a human shaitan, or the shayatul jinn, the shaitan amongst the jinns. And I mentioned that in any type of combat or sport, people want home field advantage because you get, your home court, you get that momentum and boost. Well, here in America, shaitan has home field advantage, which means you got to fight doubly hard. This is what Karbala is about. We can learn about just crying in the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Badr. Look, Hamza was martyred. We learned how to cry then. At Rasulullah's death, we learned how to cry. So Karbala is much more than just crying. Remembering something is much more than just gathering and writing a poem. It's taking the lessons from that event. This is an epic. This is a huge event. A huge event. It's a huge demonstration. Now, is it fair that Imam Hussain gives the life of his best companions, his dear relatives, and himself, and we belittle the situation by crying and not doing anything else? Is this fair to Imam Hussain? Is this fair to Imam Hussain? Is this truly honoring Ashura? The epic battle? No one can say there's a certain age limit on fighting shaitan, because there were youth fighting shaitan. No one can say it's just, the men who are waging war against shaitan. The ladies were waging war against shaitan. But we must understand there are two sides to Karbala, not one. The emotional and educational side. The emotional side makes you hate oppression. It was horrific what they did. But the educational side is meant to lead and show you how to deal with shaitan and how to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was the desert of Karbala that gave Imam such a rank that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him with the imams, with 9 imams coming from his descendants. He was honored through that. But the main gist that we're missing is that the Battle of Karbala was a battle of character. Imam Hussain was teaching the whole world, because guess what? Which many people, I don't think they neglect it. I think they block it out purposely, or deny it. That Imam Hussain was fighting Shia. When he sent Ali Akbar, he said, "Oh Allah, you are a witness that I'm sending this son out to fight the polytheists, fight the disbelievers. And as concerning handsomeness, perfection, and character, he is like the Rasulullah." And he said, so much so that when I wanted to see the Rasulullah, I would look at Ali Akbar. And then he said, "Oh Allah, also be witness that I am fighting those who invited me here. They pledge allegiance to me, to uprise with me, and now they can't wait to spill my blood." So there also, one thing that we're learning in Karbala, which I don't know why it's not emphasized, there are 2 types of Shia. The one who are truthful to their claim and the ones who are not. What did we learn from Abu Fadl Abbas? We're talking about promises. Obviously, we made a promise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what? To not worship shaitan and worship him, right? We also took a promise to follow Ahlul Bayt and obey them, right? Okay. Not to just like Ahlul Bayt, but to follow Ahlul Bayt and obey them. We made a promise to do this, right? There's only one type of individual that makes a promise and breaks it. Making promises and breaking them is a quality of who? Shaitan. Have we been keeping true to our promise to Ahlul Bayt? Have we been keeping true to our promise to Ahlul Bayt? Abu Fadl al-Abbas, we look at the fact that he did not engage the army. He engaged the battalion that was attacking the water, that was guarding the water. One thing that is missed or neglected in this epic battle within the battle is that he was concerned with what? Keeping a promise. He promised those children that he would bring them water back. And he meant it sincerely in his heart. Inshallah. The quality of shaitan is that when he makes a promise, he intends to break it. The quality of a mu'min or mu'mina is that when he or she makes a promise, they intend to keep it, inshallah. Now, have we been keeping our promise to Ahlul Bayt? Have we been keeping our promise to Imam Hussain? This Ashura should not be like last Ashura. It should be like on any Ashura that we've ever experienced before. Because we should understand that there are two sides to it, and we have also made a promise to Imam. If we're going to honor Imam Hussain, then we must honor him correctly. I remember my father telling me about raking the grass. If you're going to do it, you better do it right the first time. And you must understand that there are two similarities there's one similarity and one difference between Imam Hussein's mission and Imam Zaman's mission. Ajalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. The similarity of their missions is this. The movement was rapid and you didn't have time to sit and think about whether you wanted to join it or not. The caravan was moving. If you were going with it, you went with it. If you were delaying, then you were left behind. And that's the same with the movement of Imam Zaman, Ajalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. It's also going to be a rapid movement. If you're with him, you're going to go. If you're not, then you're going to miss out. Many had missed out on the caravan of love. That's why you had the Tawabin movement and so on and so forth. Those who missed out on this event for different reasons. So that's the similarity. Imam Hussein's movement and Imam Mahdi's movement will be similar in the fact that the movement will be rapid, because we know that a revolution is a change that happens fast. Revolution is just another word for a fast change, a quick change, immediate change. So that's a similarity. The difference is there were only 72 helping Imam Hussain. There will be thousands helping Imam Mahdi. The thing is this. The thing is this. Will you be among them? Will you be eligible for that? It is quite common that we always say, man, I wish I was in Karbala. I wish I was in Karbala. But we're scared to be Shia now, let alone standing in front of a 10,000-man army. We're Shia in the centers. When we go out, we're in Taqiyya, with no need to be in Taqiyya. We're scared. Zainab is begging her brother to send her sons. A woman is begging her brother to send her sons to the battlefield. We're scared to send our daughters to school with a hijab because not she won't be beheaded, not because she will have her rims ripped off, but because somebody may say something bad about her. Think about these things. Think about these things. What did we learn from Karbala? How are we honoring our Imam? Think about these things. The Imams say, many narrations in the occultation of Imam al-Zaman do taqleed to a martyr. And there are many hadiths that verify this, right? Taqleed shouldn't be a new word because we do taqleed first and foremost to Rasulullah. And then we did taqleed to Imam Ali. And then we did taqleed to Imam Hassan. And then we did taqleed, or we're supposed to be doing taqleed to Imam Hussain. What does taqleed mean? Imitating. 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 Are we imitating Imam Hussain? Are we his follower or are we his fan? Are we followers or are we fans? And the thing is this, my dear brothers and sisters. We're at the end of our rope as far as time is concerned. We don't have time for slow, gradual changes. It's time for radical changes, quick changes. Because many of us, we will not miss a modulus commemorating Ahlul Bayt, but we also will have a very difficult time refraining from doing things that Shaitan encourages. This is important, my dear brothers and sisters. We don't just gather to cry. We gather to commemorate and have the lessons. We gather to be reminded of the lessons. We just don't curse Yazid, Ibn Ziyad and the rest. We hate them because they were oppressors. It's not just about their names, it was what they were doing. They were oppressing. So what did we learn? It's not about the name of the oppressor, it's oppression. Imam taught us that we don't just like a few oppressors, we don't like any oppressors. We just don't like some acts of oppression. We hate all acts of oppression. And we're supposed to stand against them, against all of them one way, shape, or form. Even more so, the oppression that we do against ourselves, because every time we disobey Allah, we are oppressing ourselves. What did we learn from Karbala? Look at the character. Imam Hussain went out to expose. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. There are two ways to get a point across. Understand, there are two ways to get a point across. You can be an authority and teach that way. You're an authority and you just teach straight out. Another way is to be oppressed. And you also get your point across. Because you're exposing the character of the enemy. Imam Hussain exposed the character of a fake Shia. Let me rewind for a second. Maybe some have forgotten. Imam Hussain received a large number of letters from Shiites saying, come to Kufa, we have some 30,000 swords ready at your disposal right now. Muslim ibn Aqil also confirmed this and sent his letter confirming it. This is true, Imam. Remember? These were Shiites. A few, if that, were from Damascus. These were people who pledged allegiance to Imam Hussain. We have pledged allegiance to Imam Hussain. Are we killing him again? Are we killing his legacy? Inshallah, we're not killing his legacy. Killing his legacy would be not following his sunnah, not learning from his examples, not obeying or disobeying the Quran. And he is the walking Quran of his time. We have a choice to make. To be the Shia who died with him or the Shia who slaughtered him. And yes, we can commemorate him by upholding his teachings, by learning from the lessons and the sacrifices he made, or we can add insult to injury by doing exactly what the opponents did to him. Claimed to be his Shia with their mouth and ripped his head off with their swords. This is important, my dear brothers and sisters. There are two sides to Karbala: the emotional side and the educational side. You must understand, we talk about on these 10 days, 10, maybe 11 or 12 individuals. We speak about Qasim, alayhi salam, right? Hassan had 3 sons who were martyred in Karbala. Imam Ali had, I think, 3 or 4 sons martyred in Karbala, but all we speak about is a few of them. There are many lessons to be learned in Karbala. One thing is that Abu Fadl Abbas died trying to give water to the children. How does that relate to our time? How does that relate to our time? The Imams have likened water as truth. The Imams have made an analogy of pure water as truth. So in this day and time, we're trying to satiate the thirst of our children as well by giving them the true teachings of Ahlul Bayt. And that character that Imam Hussain exposed the character of Umar ibn Sa'd. He exposed the character of Shimr. He exposed the character of Yazid ibn Ziyad. He exposed their character, and he also demonstrated the character of Imam demonstrated the character that a Shiite should have. Bravery, courage, standing up against oppression. It is better to die honorably than to live oppressed, the Imam had taught us. And you got to realize, we look at the companions that were there. It was an honor to be there with the Imam. It was an honor because everybody wasn't there with the Imam. There were some individuals that we know in history that were trying to get there but got lost or something, or got put in prison. They wanted to be there, but they weren't honored for different reasons. So it was an honor to be there with the Imam. So what gave these individuals such a high status? In simple terms, they rejected Shaitan and they obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They obeyed their Imam. 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 And so being oppressed, the Imam wasn't in authority. Remember, there's 2 ways to teach a lesson. He wasn't in authority to just sit and teach the masses. So he taught the masses by exposing the character of Shaitan. Shaitan is not about justice, he's about vengeance. He exposed that character. Now, when you think of a lady who, for the last 3 days, can barely nurse her child because her breasts have dried, and she's looking at her child who's 10 months old, who is shriveled up so bad it looks like he's 6 months old, and she's enduring this. And her husband comes into the tent and looks at his wife, looks at his young child, and he himself, his back is bent, his hair, his beard is totally white from stress and all of the events that have been plaguing him, all that he's seen, all that he's endured. And it hurts even worse because those who were doing it to him pledged allegiance to him. And what can a woman say but, please help this child? I know these guys can't be that bad that they would not even help a little nursing child. She can't even nurse her own child because she herself is dry. See that young child there. Not fat and healthy and full of color. Emaciated, lips parched and chapped, can barely move the tongue. Let out a moan so bad that is what drove Imam to take the child outside. And Rubab says, please, The heat is scorching out there. The air is hot and dry. Arizona is nothing like the heat of the desert of Karbala. So Imam wraps the baby in his cloak and proceeds out. And he walks towards the enemy ranks. And as soon as he is close enough that they can hear him clearly, he begins to talk to them. And they're automatically thinking it's some type of trick, some type of plot. And he told them, if you think this is some plot or some tactic for me to get water for myself, this is not the case. He unwraps the baby. He says, can you please just spare water for this young child? And if you feel that by bringing water, I'll take it myself, what does Imam do? He lays the child on the sand. And believe it or not, even though some of those men tore the bodies apart of 12 and 14-year-old boys, some of them were fathers themselves, and they began to be moved at this. There began to be grumblings and mumblings in the ranks of Umar ibn Sa'd's army, wanting him to say, listen, that is very, very low if you don't give him, this child, some water. And Umar ibn Sa'd knows that things are getting shaky. The army, the companions of Imam, his kinship did not break the morale of this corrupt horde. But that child might be able to do what they could not do and break the morale of the army. Many of them were crying and turning away, holding back tears, seeing Imam's condition and seeing that baby. So what does this shaitan do? What does Umar ibn Sa'd do? Umar ibn Sa'd, who at one time was a Shia of Imam Hussain. Yes, Umar ibn Sa'd at one time was a Shia of Imam Hussain. So he realizes that because the shaitan he is, the quality of shaitan, they're not about justice, it's about vengeance. And the quality of shaitan is jealousy. Everyone was jealous of the position of Ahlul Bayt. So he instructs Harmalah, his chief archer, promises him dunya. Yeah. Ibn Sa'd promises Harmalah, Lanatullahi alayh, promises dunya. That thing we covet so much, that thing we hold on too tight so much. Umar ibn Sa'd promised Harmalah so much finances in dunya. So he reaches for that arrow. And he was known for his marksmanship. And he fires one arrow to where the baby is laying, but it misses his mark because Imam has picked up the child just in time. And then Harmalah grabs another arrow and he's taking aim, and off over the shoulder of Imam Hussain and the child, Ali Asghar, he sees the silhouette of a woman looking out of a tent. And he even knows that this is a mother concerned about her young, dying child. And that even distracted this shaitan, and he missed again. Then Umar ibn Sa'd encourages him more by offering him what? Dunya. Dunya. That thing that we sacrifice our hereafter for. Dunya. And the three-pronged arrow is already too big for the target. The shaitan fires the arrow. It didn't pierce Ali Asghar's throat. It shredded it and embedded into Imam's arm. So much so that when the impact hit, blood splashed into Imam's face. Look at the character of these Shiites. Look at the character of those who were not truthful to their promise. Look at the character of those who wrote letters inviting Imam to them. Look at the character of those who promised to defend him, to obey him, and to die in his obedience. Imam intends to take the baby back and thinks about it and retraces his steps backwards and forwards, knowing what it would be like taking the baby back to its mother. Rabab, she was going to miss her child. She loved her dear child. And she asked, did they at least give him water before they killed him? Because there were so many other youth that had died as martyrs that she wasn't sad at the fact of losing her child to martyrdom. She just wanted them to at least have some compassion on the child before they did it. Who did this horrible act? Who did this heinous crime? Who could have this horrible character of Shaitan? Were they an army from Damascus? No. Were they the same individuals whose signatures and seals were in the camel packs of Imam inviting him to Kufa? Yes. They betrayed him. They betrayed him. Imam exposed the character of Shaitan. Through his acts of oppression, through his being oppressed, and the acts of oppression from the horde, it taught mankind a huge lesson. That arrow piercing the throat of that baby taught mankind a huge lesson. And one of those lessons, it taught us the distinction between those who call themselves Shia and those who manifest that they are Shia through their actions and their obedience. Imam Hussain gave water to the opposing army and even watered their horses because he is Ahlul Bayt. He is reflecting the character of a Shiite. And those shaitans could not even give water to a suckling baby. And to add insult to injury, you can hear the flow of the water off in the near distance. Cry, my brothers. Cry, sisters. And when you finish crying, act. Yes, cry. Whether you cry outwardly, whether you cry inside, whether your heart is pained, after you regroup, after you wipe your tears, then act. Honor Imam Hussain properly. Honor Ali Asghar properly. Honor the entire Ahlul Bayt properly. as we commemorate the epic battle that took place on this date 1300 and some odd years ago. Put on your battle armor. Gather your weaponry. Gather the troops and wage war against Shaitan. And the weaponry that I'm referring to is the only weaponry that you could use to defeat the Shaitan. The only tools that you could use to defeat the Shaitan. Obedience. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma kun li waliyika al-hujjati ibn al-Hasan. Salawatuka alayhi wa ala abai. في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا والدليل وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Mu'mineen, please settle down. Inshallah, we are going to continue our program of Masai Baba Abdullah Hussain alayhi salam.